The storm came like the end of the world. Wind tore through the valley with teeth of ice, ripping shutters from their hinges and sending ancient trees crashing across forgotten roads. Rain fell in sheets so thick the world disappeared behind curtains of gray, and thunder rolled through the mountains like the drums of some terrible, approaching army. Mira Ashford stood in the doorway of the abandoned chapel, watching the storm devour everything in its path. Her threadbare coat, 3 sizes too large and salvaged from a donation bin, did nothing against the cold that seeped into her bones. Her hands, raw and cracked from washing dishes at the village inn, clutched the frame to steady herself against wind that threatened to pull her into the darkness. She should have stayed in the village. Should have waited out the storm in the inn's cramped storage room where she'd been sleeping for the past 3 months, ever since the landlord evicted her for missing rent. But something had called her here tonight. To this crumbling chapel on the edge of the wilderness. To this place where she and Thomas had been married 6 years ago, when the world still held color and hope felt like something more than a cruel joke. The chapel door groaned behind her, hanging by a single rusted hinge. Inside, moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, illuminating stone pews covered in moss and debris. Everything was decay and ruin. Everything matched what Mira had become. She turned to retreat inside when she saw him. A man lay crumpled against the chapel's outer wall, half buried in mud and fallen leaves. No coat. No shelter. Just dark clothing that clung to a frame too still to be sleeping, too elegant to belong in these forgotten woods. Mira's breath caught. Every instinct screamed danger. Strangers didn't come to these mountains. Strangers didn't collapse outside abandoned chapels in the middle of storms that could kill. But neither did decent people leave someone to die in the cold. She'd learned that lesson 3 years ago, when Thomas hadn't come home. When the village guard found his body in the woods, throat torn open, wedding ring missing, and no one had cared enough to find out why. Mira moved toward the stranger before she could talk herself out of it. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Pale skin that seemed to glow against the darkness. Hair like moonlight, plastered to a face carved with impossible perfection. High cheekbones. Full lips parted slightly, breath so shallow she had to press close to confirm he was breathing at all. His eyes flickered open, glowing faintly like dying embers before dimming to something almost human. "Don't," he whispered, his voice like silk torn on broken glass. "Don't touch me. Dangerous." But Mira was already pulling the blanket from her own shoulders. It wasn't much, a thin wool throw she'd carried from the inn, the only thing she owned besides her coat and the clothes on her back. It smelled of wood smoke and the lavender soap she could no longer afford. She draped it over him with the same care she'd once used tucking Thomas into bed after long days in the fields. Her fingers brushed the stranger's skin. Cold. Impossibly cold. Like touching marble left in winter darkness. "Everyone needs help sometimes," she whispered, echoing words Thomas had once said to her. Words she tried to live by even as the world took everything she loved. The stranger's eyes focused on her face with an intensity that made her heart stutter. Something flickered there, recognition, wonder, pain so ancient it seemed to have weight. "Kindness," he breathed as though the word were foreign. As though he'd forgotten its meaning centuries ago. From one who has nothing left to give. Lightning split the sky. In its flash, Mira saw his face fully, the hollows beneath his eyes, the tremor in his hands, the way his body seemed to be breaking down from the inside. Dying, she realized. Whatever he was dying. "The chapel," she said, gesturing to the door. "Get inside. It's not much, but it's better than drowning out here." "You should run," he said. But he let her help him to his feet, his weight against her shoulder far heavier than his lean frame suggested. "You should run and never look back." "I don't run," Mira said, though that was a lie. She'd been running for 3 years. Running from memories. From grief. From the ghost of a man who'd promised forever and left her with nothing but questions and a grave she couldn't afford to mark properly. They staggered into the chapel together. The stranger collapsed onto a stone pew, Mira's blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. He pulled it close like it was something sacred, his fingers trembling against the worn fabric. "What's your name?" Mira asked, settling onto the pew across from him, maintaining distance even as something in her chest pulled her closer. He was silent for a long moment. Rain hammered the roof. Wind howled through the broken windows. Finally he spoke. "Lucian," he said. "Lucian Thorne. I'm Mira." She paused. "Mira Ashford." His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Then his gaze dropped to her left hand, where the pale line of a missing wedding ring marked her finger like a scar. "Ashford," he repeated, and something terrible crossed his face. Recognition. Guilt. But before Mira could ask what he knew, what that look meant, Lucian's eyes rolled back and he collapsed against the pew, unconscious. Mira sat alone in the storm-torn chapel with an impossible stranger and a blanket that would leave her freezing through the night. And somewhere in the darkness, something ancient began to wake. Mira didn't sleep. She sat huddled on her pew, arms wrapped around herself, shivering as the temperature dropped and the storm raged. Across from her, Lucian remained unconscious, his breathing so shallow she checked twice to make sure he still lived. As dawn approached, the storm finally broke. Gray light filtered through the chapel's broken roof, illuminating the destruction. Shattered pews. Collapsed sections of wall. And still, somehow, this place where she'd married Thomas felt more like home than anywhere else. Lucian stirred as the first rays of sunlight touched the chapel floor. His eyes opened, no longer glowing red but a deep crimson that reminded Mira of wine, of blood, of things she didn't want to name. He sat up slowly, the blanket sliding from his shoulders. His gaze found her immediately, taking in her shivering form, her bloodless lips, her hands blue with cold. "You gave me your only protection," he said quietly. "It wasn't a question. You needed it more. I didn't deserve it." Something in his tone made Myra's chest tighten. She'd heard that kind of self-loathing before. In her own voice. In the mirror. In the dark hours when grief became too heavy to carry alone. "No one deserves to freeze to death," she said. Lucian stood with fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone who'd been dying hours ago. He moved to where she sat and draped the blanket around her shoulders with careful precision. His fingers didn't touch her skin, but she felt the cold radiating from him like winter given form. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying weight that made the words feel like an oath. "For your mercy. For your courage. For seeing someone worth saving when you had every reason to walk away." "I didn't see someone worth saving," Mira admitted. "I just saw someone who needed help." "That," Lucian said softly, "is why you're extraordinary." He moved toward the chapel door, pausing in the threshold. Morning light caught him, and for a moment Mira could have sworn he looked translucent, like something not entirely solid, not entirely of this world. "I must go," he said, "before full daylight. But I will return." "Why?" He turned back, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. Sorrow. Determination. Something that looked dangerously like devotion. "Because I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with words alone," he said. "And because," he stopped, jaw tightening. "Because there are things you need to know. About your husband's death. About what really happened 3 years ago." Myra's world tilted. "What do you know about Thomas?" But Lucian was already gone, dissolving into morning shadows like he'd never been there at all. Only the blanket remained, warm with a heat that shouldn't exist, and smelling now of winter forests and ancient stone and something else, something that made Myra's pulse quicken for reasons she couldn't name. She stood alone in the chapel, clutching the blanket, staring at the empty doorway. And in her pocket, she felt the weight of the only thing she had left of Thomas, a pressed flower from their wedding day, dry and brown and crumbling to dust, like everything else she'd loved. The village of Thornhaven clung to the mountainside like a barnacle to a ship, stubborn, weather-beaten, forgotten by the world beyond the valley. Mira walked its muddy streets as dawn broke fully, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, drawing stares from the early risers. Mrs. Kellen, the baker's wife, crossed to the other side of the street when she saw Mira approaching. She'd been doing that for 3 years now. Ever since Thomas died and the rumors started. His widow's cursed. Bad luck follows her like a shadow. Best to keep your distance. Mira had stopped trying to change their minds. had stopped trying to explain that she'd done nothing wrong, that Thomas's death wasn't her fault, that she was drowning in grief just like they'd be if their husbands were torn apart by what? The village guard had called it an animal attack. A wolf, maybe, or a bear. But Mira had seen the body before they forced her away. Had seen wounds that didn't match any animal she knew. Had seen the precision of the killing, the way Thomas's throat had been opened like something, had known exactly where to strike. She reached the silver bell in just as Mr. Garrett, the owner, was unlocking the kitchen entrance. He looked at her with the tired resignation of a man who'd rather fire her but couldn't afford to lose free labor. The day dragged on. Evening came. The inn filled with travelers seeking shelter after the storm, and 3 men in dark cloaks who sat in the corner booth and spoke in voices too low to hear. Mira felt their eyes on her as she moved through the common room, collecting plates and mugs. Felt the weight of their attention like ice water down her spine. One of them, tall, with silver hair and eyes that gleamed gold in the firelight, smiled at her. "All teeth. All wrong. You're the Ashford widow," he said. It wasn't a question. Myra's hands trembled. She nearly dropped the tray. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." His smile widened. "Thomas Ashford. Dead 3 years. Throat torn out. Wedding ring stolen." He leaned forward. "Such a tragedy. And you, all alone in the world. No family. No protection. Nothing but grief and poverty. Leave her alone, Silas." Mr. Garrett appeared from the kitchen, his face pale. "She's under my employ. Which means she's under my protection." The man called Silas laughed. "Your protection means nothing, innkeeper. Not against what's coming." He stood, his companions rising with him. They moved toward the door with inhuman grace, and as Silas passed Mira, he leaned close enough for her to smell earth and rot and something ancient. "He's looking for you," Silas whispered. "The king. And when he finds you, when he realizes what you are, what you carry," his smile was terrible. "Oh, let's just say your husband's death will seem merciful by comparison." They left. The inn door closed behind them. Mira stood frozen, tray clutched in white-knuckled hands, heart hammering against her ribs. Mr. Garrett grabbed her arm. "You need to leave. Tonight. Whatever trouble you've brought to my establishment." "I haven't brought anything. Those men are dangerous. I've seen their kind before. And if they're asking about you, if they know about your husband," he released her roughly. "Take your wages and go. Don't come back." He pressed a handful of coins into her hand, less than half what he owed her, and physically pushed her toward the door. Mira stumbled into the street as night fell. The coins felt like blood money in her pocket. The blanket wrapped around her shoulders was still warm with impossible heat. And somewhere in the darkness, she felt eyes watching. Waiting. Hunting. She ran toward the forest, toward the old gamekeeper's cottage that had stood empty since old Willem died last winter. The woods closed around her like a fist. Moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. Every shadow held menace. Every sound made her heart race. She was nearly to the cottage when she felt it. A presence. Cold. Ancient. Predatory. Mira spun around. 3 figures emerged from the darkness. The men from the inn. Silas and his companions. Their eyes glowed gold now, no longer pretending to be human. "Did you really think you could run?" Silas asked, his voice echoing strangely. "Did you really think he could protect you?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Lucian Thorne. Vampire King. The fool who traded centuries of his power to save a dying stranger last night. Silas's smile was all fangs now. "He's been hunting us for 3 years. Hunting the ones who killed your husband. Hunting for this." He held up his hand. Dangling from his fingers, catching the moonlight, was a ring. Thomas's wedding ring. Gold band. Simple. Engraved on the inside with words only Mira would know. "Forever, always yours." The world stopped. Mira couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only stare at the ring she'd thought lost forever, the ring she'd searched for at the murder site until the guards dragged her away, the ring that had symbolized everything good in her life before darkness consumed it. "How?" Her voice broke. "How do you have that?" "Because I took it," Silas said pleasantly. Right after I tore your husband's throat out and drank him dry. Rage exploded in Myra's chest. She lunged for him, screaming, clawing, all reason abandoned. Silas caught her wrist effortlessly. His grip was ice. His strength was absolute. He squeezed until bones ground together and Mira cried out in pain. Your husband died because he was in the way, Silas said. Because Lucian Thorn needed to be punished, and the best way to hurt a king is to destroy the things he might one day love. He leaned close, breath cold against Myra's ear. We knew, you see. Knew about the prophecy. About the woman who would save him when he was at his lowest. About the bond that would form. So we killed every kind soul in this valley. Every person who might show mercy to a dying stranger. He released her wrist, and Mira collapsed to her knees. But we missed you, Silas continued. The widow who hid in shadows. The broken woman no one looked at twice. His smile was poison. Until last night, when you wrapped your blanket around our greatest enemy and sealed your fate. The three vampires closed in. Their fangs extended. Their eyes blazed with hunger and malice. Mira closed her eyes, Thomas's name on her lips, and waited for death. It didn't come. Instead, the temperature dropped so fast her breath turned to ice. Shadows exploded from the trees like living smoke. And a voice, cold, ancient, resonant with absolute fury, split the night. Touch her, and I will make your deaths last centuries. Lucian Thorn stepped from the darkness, and he was beautiful and terrible all at once. Lucian was transformed. Gone was the dying stranger from the chapel. This was a vampire king in his full, terrifying glory. His eyes blazed crimson, bright enough to cast shadows. His hair moved in a wind that didn't exist. And the power radiating from him. It pressed against Myra's skin like pressure before a storm, making her ears ring and her heart stutter. Silas and his companions backed away, their earlier confidence evaporating. Lucian, Silas said, trying for casual and failing. We were just threatening what is mine to protect. Lucian's voice carried no emotion. No rage. Just cold certainty. Just hunting the woman who saved my life. Just wielding a stolen ring like a trophy. His gaze locked on Thomas's wedding band still dangling from Silas's fingers. Give. Me. Lucian moved. One moment he stood 20 feet away. The next, his hand was around Silas's throat, lifting the vampire off the ground like he weighed nothing. The speed was impossible. The strength was absolute. 3 years, Lucian said quietly. 3 years I've been hunting you. 3 years I've tracked your kills, your movements, trying to understand why you slaughtered an innocent man in these woods. His grip tightened. And now I know. You killed Thomas Ashford to punish me for crimes I hadn't yet committed. To prevent a future that hadn't yet happened. The prophecy, Silas choked out. The prophecy said a woman of compassion would save me. That her mercy would forge a bond neither time nor death could break. Lucian's free hand plucked the ring from Silas's grasp. You killed her husband to ensure she'd be too broken to show mercy. Too consumed by grief to see a stranger suffering. He smiled, and it was terrifying. You failed. Silas's companions lunged. Lucian destroyed them without looking. One gesture, and they exploded into ash, their screams cut short. You killed Thomas Ashford for nothing, Lucian said. You created the exact grief that would teach his widow the value of mercy. You made her into exactly what the prophecy required. He leaned close. Thank you for that. Right before I end you. Lucian's hand ignited with black flame. Silas burned from the inside out, his screams echoing through the forest until silence fell. Ash drifted on the wind. The ring gleamed in Lucian's hand. And Mira sat on the forest floor, trembling, unable to process what she'd just witnessed. Lucian approached slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. He knelt before her in the mud, heedless of his expensive clothes, and held out the ring. I believe this belongs to you, he said softly. Mira stared at the band. At the gold that had circled Thomas's finger. At the engraving she couldn't see but knew by heart. You knew, she whispered. Last night. When I told you my name, you knew who I was. Yes. You knew about Thomas. About his murder. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Her voice rose, cracking with grief and rage. You let me give you my blanket. Let me freeze through the night. Let me believe you were just some stranger who needed help. And all along you knew. She couldn't finish. Lucien's expression was agony. I didn't know how to tell you. Didn't know how to explain that your husband died because of me. Because of what I am. Because fate decided you would be bound to me. I'm not bound to anyone. Mira snatched the ring from his hand. The metal was cold. So cold. Nothing like she remembered. Thomas was everything to me. Everything. And you're saying he died because of some prophecy? Some cosmic joke? I'm saying he died because my enemies are cowards who kill innocents to wound me. Lucien's hands clenched into fists. I'm saying I have spent 3 years hunting them. 3 years trying to find this ring, trying to find some way to honor your husband's memory and protect the widow I knew existed but could never find. You should have stayed away. Tears streamed down Myra's face. You should have died in that storm. You're right. Lucien stood slowly. You're absolutely right. I should have refused your mercy. Should have warned you away. He took a step back. Then another. I will leave, he said. I will disappear from your life. You'll never see me again. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. But know this, Mira Ashford, your husband's death was not your fault. His love for you was real. His sacrifice, protecting this village from the monsters who hunted it, that was real. And he died a hero, even if no one remembers. How do you know that? Myra's voice was barely audible. Because I was there. Lucien's composure finally cracked. I was tracking Silas through these woods 3 years ago. I arrived as Thomas was dying. He made me promise. His voice broke. He made me promise to find his widow. To protect her. To return his ring and tell her that his last thoughts were of her love. The world tilted. Mira couldn't breathe. Thomas spoke to you? His last words were, tell Mira I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her. Tell her to live. Lucien's eyes glistened. I've carried those words for 3 years. I've hunted his killers. I've searched for you. And when you found me dying in that storm, when you offered me mercy, he stopped. I realized fate had given me a chance to finally fulfill my promise. Mira stared at the ring in her palm. At this impossible vampire who claimed to carry Thomas's last words. I don't believe in fate, she whispered. Neither do I. Lucien smiled sadly. I believe in choice. And I choose to honor your husband's sacrifice by keeping his widow safe, whether she wants me to or not. He turned to leave, dissolving into shadow. Wait, Mira called out, surprising herself. Lucien materialized again, hope and fear warring in his expression. What are you offering? She asked. A room in my house. Food. Safety. Time to heal. He held her gaze. And distance, if that's what you need. I have 1,000 rooms in my manor. You'd never have to see me if you didn't want to. Mira looked down at the ring. At Thomas's ring. The symbol of a love that had been real, even if it ended in tragedy. The symbol of a man who'd told her to live. She slipped the ring onto her right hand. It hung loose. She'd lost weight over 3 years of poverty and grief, but it stayed. One night, she said. I'll stay one night. And then we'll see. Lucien's expression transformed. Not quite a smile. Something softer. Something that looked dangerously like hope. One night, he agreed. He offered his hand. Mira stared at it for a long moment before taking it. His skin was cold, but his grip was gentle. Steady. And as shadows rose around them, as Lucien transported them from the forest to somewhere unknown, Mira clutched Thomas's ring and whispered a silent prayer. I'm trying to live, Thomas. I'm trying. Please let this be the right choice. The darkness swallowed them whole. Lucien's manor wasn't what Mira expected. She'd imagined Gothic towers and dark stone, something out of fairy tales meant to frighten children. Instead, the building that materialized from shadow was elegant but warm, honey-colored stone covered in climbing roses, tall windows that caught moonlight and made it glow, gardens that smelled of night-blooming jasmine. It looked like a home. Not a castle. Not a fortress. A place where people lived instead of merely existed. Inside, the manor was vast but not oppressive. Polished wood floors. Tapestries that depicted forests and stars instead of battles. Fireplaces that burned with actual warm flames. And everywhere were books. Shelves lined every wall, stuffed with volumes in languages Mira couldn't read and some she could. Lucian led her to a beautiful room. A four-poster bed with deep blue linens. A fireplace already burning. A window seat overlooking gardens bathed in moonlight. A wardrobe revealing dresses in simple cuts but rich fabrics. "I took the liberty of preparing this when I decided to find you," Lucian said from the doorway. "Why?" Mira turned to face him. "Why go to all this trouble for someone you'd never met?" "Because I failed Thomas Ashford," he said finally. "I arrived too late to save him. But I wasn't too late to honor his dying wish." After he left, Mira drew a bath in the beautiful marble bathroom. When she finally sank into the water, heat soaking into muscles that had been tense for years, she wept. Not from grief this time. From relief. From the simple, overwhelming kindness of hot water and soap and a locked door behind which she was finally, blessedly safe. When she emerged, she found soup waiting by the fireplace. Thick with vegetables and herbs. Fresh bread. Butter. And a note in elegant script. "Take your time. I'll be in the library if you need anything." Later, she heard music. A piano, playing something slow and melancholy. Without deciding to, she found herself following the sound through corridors to a conservatory filled with plants that bloomed at night. There, at a grand piano, Lucian played. His eyes were closed. His fingers moved across keys with the confidence of centuries of practice. The melody was heartbreaking, beautiful and sad and full of longing. "You couldn't sleep?" he asked when he noticed her. "I haven't been able to sleep properly in 3 years." "Neither have I." He gestured to the room. "This helps sometimes. Music. Plants. Things that grow and change and remind me the world isn't all death and darkness." Mira stepped inside. "You said you failed Thomas. That you arrived too late. But you were there. You heard his last words. Why were you in those woods?" "I was hunting Silas. He'd killed 12 people across the valley, drained them dry and left their bodies for animals to finish." He paused. "I thought I'd arrive in time. But I was wrong. Thomas wasn't random, was he?" "No." Lucian moved to the windows. "Silas knew the prophecy. Knew that somewhere in this valley lived a woman destined to save me. He couldn't identify her, so he killed every person who showed kindness to strangers. Every person who might offer help to someone in need." His reflection in the glass looked haunted. Thomas died because he was good. Because he embodied the exact mercy Silas wanted to destroy. "The prophecy said I would save you. But I didn't know you 3 years ago." Prophecies see potential. Possibility. Lucian turned back to her. 3 years ago, you were Thomas's wife, happy, whole, still believing the world was kind. If I'd encountered you then, if I'd been dying, would you have helped me?" Mira thought about it. "Yes," she admitted. "Thomas and I helped everyone. We believed in mercy." "Exactly. You were already the person the prophecy described. But Silas broke you." Lucian's expression was fierce. "Except he didn't break you completely. Some part of your kindness survived. And when you saw me dying in that storm, that surviving part chose to save me anyway. I chose to freeze to death for a stranger. You chose to prove that cruelty didn't win." He took a step closer. "That's why the prophecy worked. Not because of fate. Because of choice. Your choice to remain good despite every reason not to be." Mira's legs felt weak. She sank onto the piano bench. "I don't feel good. I feel broken." "Broken things can still be beautiful." Lucian knelt before her, carefully not touching. "Broken things can still save lives. Your mercy saved mine, Mira Ashford." Their eyes met. Red and brown. Immortal and mortal. She felt seen. Understood in a way no one had bothered to understand since Thomas died. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. I don't know how to be anything except grief. Then just be that. Lucien's voice was gentle. Be grief. Be broken. Be whatever you need to be. I'm not asking you to heal or move on or become someone new. He paused. I'm only asking that you let yourself be safe while you carry your pain. He led her back to her room. Before he could leave, she caught his sleeve. Lucien? The music. What was that piece called? He smiled sadly. It doesn't have a name. I wrote it about 300 years ago, when I realized immortality meant watching everyone I loved die while I remained unchanged. He paused. I call it the weight of forever. It's beautiful. Beauty and sorrow aren't mutually exclusive. His red eyes held hers. Sometimes they're the same thing. And for the first time in 3 years, Mira slept without nightmares. Days became weeks. Weeks became a month. Mira lived in Lucien's manor like a ghost, present but separate, existing in the spaces between his world and her own. She ate the meals he prepared, wore the clothes he provided, read books from his vast library. But she kept her distance. Lucien honored it. He never pushed, never demanded, never even asked for gratitude. He simply existed in parallel, playing piano late at night, reading in the library during the day, ensuring she had everything she needed without making her feel indebted. But the more time she spent in Lucien's presence, the more she noticed things. The way he always left the chair by the fire empty, her chair, though she'd never claimed it. The way he kept fresh flowers in her room. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with reverence and yearning and carefully banked hope. It terrified her, because she was starting to look at him the same way. 1 month and 3 days after arriving, Mira stood in the library at midnight, unable to sleep. She'd been reading Thomas's favorite book, a collection of poetry about love and loss. You should be resting, Lucien said from the doorway. I can't sleep. The nightmares again. He moved into the room, careful to maintain distance. Would it help to talk about him? About Thomas? You haven't spoken his name since you arrived. I don't know how. Myra's voice cracked. I feel like I'm betraying him. Like accepting your help means forgetting what I lost. Survival isn't betrayal. It feels like it. Thomas loved you, Lucien said finally. In his last moments, he thought of you. He made me promise to protect you, to help you live. He paused. Honoring that promise, allowing yourself to be protected, that's not betrayal. That's loving him enough to respect his final wish. Tears slid down Myra's cheeks. Instead, she asked, why do you care so much? About honoring a promise to a stranger? Lucien was quiet for a long time. Because 300 years ago, I loved someone. Deeply. Completely. He moved to the window. She was human. Mortal. We had 30 years together before age claimed her. And in those 30 years, she taught me that the length of time matters less than the depth of feeling. What was her name? Eleanor. He smiled, but it was devastated. She had your courage. Your stubborn insistence on showing mercy even when the world didn't deserve it. And when she died, his voice broke. When she died, I swore I'd honor her memory by protecting that same mercy whenever I encountered it. Thomas reminded you of her. No. Lucien turned back to face her. You do. The words hung in the air. Mira couldn't breathe. I'm not her. I know exactly who you are. Lucien took a step closer. You're Mira Ashford. Widow. Survivor. A woman who gave her last blanket to a dying stranger and changed the course of both their lives. He paused. You're also starting to care for me, and that terrifies you because it feels like betraying Thomas's memory. Stop. Mira backed away. I can sense it, Mira. Through the bond that's been forming whether you acknowledge it or not. I feel your confusion, your guilt, your grief, and beneath all of that, his red eyes held hers. Attraction. Curiosity. The terrifying possibility that you might be able to feel something besides pain again. The bond was supposed to require consent. I said it would only complete if you chose it. Lucien's expression was gentle but firm. But the foundations form naturally between souls that recognize each other. The prophecy, the mercy you showed, the time we've spent existing in the same space, all of that creates threads. I don't want to decide. Myra's voice rose. I don't want to choose between grief and moving forward. Then don't. Lucian moved closer. There's no timeline for grief. No rules for when you're allowed to feel things again. Eleanor has been gone 300 years, and I still mourn her. But I also honor her by living the way she'd want me to, by protecting others, by allowing myself moments of joy, by not turning my existence into a monument to loss. I don't know how to do that. You don't have to know. You just have to keep breathing. He paused. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, you can decide what comes next. I need time, she whispered. You have it. And I need you to stop looking at me like I'm something precious. Because I'm not. I'm just broken pieces held together by spite and stubbornness. Lucian's smile was heartbreaking. Broken pieces can still cut, still shine, still matter. He reached out slowly and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. You are worth saving, Mira Ashford. Whether you believe it or not. He left. Mira sank into her chair and wept. Not from grief this time. From exhaustion. From the realization that she couldn't live in this liminal space forever. That eventually, she'd have to choose. But the threads of the bond kept weaving themselves tighter. And deep down, Mira knew the choice had already been made. She was just too terrified to admit it. 3 days later, everything shattered. Mira woke to sounds she didn't recognize. Crashes, screams, the high-pitched keen of something dying. She threw on a robe and ran from her room, following the noise to the manor's entrance hall. Chaos. 3 vampires, strangers with golden eyes and armor marked with a sigil Mira didn't recognize, circled Lucian. He bled from a dozen wounds, his movements slower than usual, his power flickering. The prophecy girl, one of the vampires hissed, noticing Mira on the stairs. The Shadow Court wants her alive. But the king dies tonight. They attacked as one. Lucian fought with desperate fury, but he was weakening. Mira watched in horror as a blade pierced his shoulder, then his side. No, she whispered. Then louder, no. She ran down the stairs, grabbing an iron poker from the fireplace. She had no training, no strength, no hope of actually helping. But she couldn't watch him die. She swung the poker at the nearest vampire. It connected with his skull. He staggered and backhanded her across the room. Mira hit the wall hard, vision blurring. Through the haze, she saw Lucian's face transform. Saw fury like she'd never witnessed. You touched her, he said, his voice resonating with absolute rage. Her. Power exploded from him. The manor shook. Windows shattered. And the 3 vampires were reduced to ash. Silence fell. Lucian collapsed to his knees, blood pooling beneath him. Mira dragged herself across the floor. She reached him, pressed her hands against the worst wound. Don't you dare die, she gasped. Don't you dare leave me too. Lucian's red eyes focused on her face. Blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. Mira. More coming. I'm not leaving you. Not safe. They want to use you. Complete the bond against your will. Then we fight them together. Myra's hands were slick with his blood. Please. Please don't die. I can't lose anyone else. Thought you didn't care. His smile was weak. I was wrong. The words burst from her. I was so wrong. I do care. I care so much it terrifies me. And if you die now, if I lose you before I can tell you, she stopped, tears streaming. Thomas told me to live. And I think this is what living means. Choosing to care even when it's terrifying. Lucian's hand rose to cup her face. His touch was cold but gentle. The bond. Let me show you how to complete it. How to save us both. How? Your blood. Freely given. Mixed with mine. He coughed. It will heal me. Bind our souls. Make you immortal. And the Shadow Court, they can't use you if the bond is already complete. Immortal. Forever, Mira. Forever watching others age and die. His eyes held hers. I wouldn't choose it for you. But it's the only way we both survive tonight. Footsteps. Coming closer. More vampires descending on the manor. Mira looked at Thomas's ring on her finger. At the symbol of a love that had been real and beautiful and tragically brief. Tell her to live. She pulled the ring off. Pressed it to her lips. Whispered, I'm sorry, Thomas. But I can't follow you into darkness. Not yet. She placed the ring carefully in her pocket. Then she took Lucien's hand. Show me, she said. Show me how to choose life. Lucien's expression transformed. Shock, hope, desperate relief. Are you certain? I'm certain I want to live. I'm certain I care for you. And I'm certain that if the alternative is watching you die, I choose to fight. He bit his own wrist first, then guided her hand to his mouth. His fangs pierced her skin, sharp, burning. Then his blood touched her lips. Copper and ice and something electric that raced through her veins like lightning. She felt his wound begin to close. Felt his strength returning. Felt their souls collide and merge. The bond snapped into place. Mira gasped as sensation flooded her, Lucien's relief, his joy, his fierce determination to protect her, his love that he'd been carefully hiding. And beneath it all, his grief for Eleanor. His respect for Thomas. His understanding that Myra's choice wasn't forgetting her past but honoring it by choosing her future. The manor doors exploded inward. A dozen vampires poured through, led by a woman with silver hair and eyes like black ice. Too late, Lucien said, standing now, completely healed. Mira rose beside him, feeling strength in her limbs she'd never possessed. The bond is complete. She's mine as much as I'm hers. And if you want her, he smiled, you'll have to go through both of us. The silver-haired woman hissed. The Shadow Court will not accept this. The Shadow Court, Mira said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, can accept it or burn. Power radiated from her and Lucien together. The attacking vampires staggered backward. Leave, Lucien commanded. Tell your masters the prophecy is fulfilled. Tell them Mira Ashford stands with me by choice. And tell them if they ever threaten her again, I will finally remember why they once feared my name. The vampires fled. The manor fell silent except for Myra's heartbeat, slower now, adjusting to immortality, but still beating. Still alive. She turned to Lucien, and he was already reaching for her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. You chose this, he whispered, knowing what it cost. I chose life, Mira corrected. She pulled back to look at him. I chose to honor Thomas by not dying with him. By accepting that love doesn't end just because loss happens. By believing I'm allowed to feel things again. Even for you. Lucien's thumb brushed away her tears. I will spend eternity proving you made the right choice. You already have. Mira smiled through the tears. You've been proving it since the night I gave you my blanket. Since you carried Thomas's last words for 3 years. Since you offered me safety without demanding anything in return. Their foreheads touched. The bond hummed between them, not ownership, not destiny, but choice. Thank you, Lucien whispered. For saving me. For choosing me. Thank you for honoring the man I loved by protecting what he loved most. For seeing me as something besides broken. For teaching me that choosing new love doesn't erase old love. It just proves the first love taught me well. They stood together as dawn approached. Mira felt the sun's impending rise through the bond, a warning that this was her world now. Darkness and immortality and forever. But she also felt Lucien's love. His certainty. His promise that forever wouldn't be empty because they'd face it together. Lucien stopped, turning to face her fully. You are Mira Ashford, widow of Thomas. Survivor of grief. The woman who gave her last blanket to a dying stranger and changed both their destinies. His hand cupped her face. Immortality doesn't erase that. It just gives you eternity to honor it. Mira pulled out Thomas's ring. The gold caught the lamplight. I'm not ready to put this away, she said. Then don't. Lucien's voice was gentle. Wear it on a chain. Keep it close. Let it remind you that love endures. That Thomas's sacrifice meant something. That you choosing to live is exactly what he wanted. Mira slipped the ring onto a chain Lucien provided. The metal settled against her chest, above her heart, and somehow it felt right. Not a burden. Not a betrayal. Just a reminder. I miss him, she whispered. I know. Lucian pulled her close. You're allowed to miss him. Forever, if you need to. Grief and joy aren't mutually exclusive. You can carry both. And as dawn broke and they retreated into the manor's protected darkness, Mira realized he was right. She would always mourn Thomas. Would always carry the wound of his loss. But she would also live. Would also love. Would also fight. Because that's what Thomas would have wanted. That's what the ring symbolized. Not just past love, but present courage. And future hope. 6 months later, Mira stood in the chapel where she'd married Thomas 7 years ago. The building was no longer abandoned. Lucian had restored it, replaced the broken windows, repaired the crumbling walls. I thought you might want to visit, he said. To remember. To honor him properly. Mira traced her fingers along the pew where she and Thomas had sat during their wedding ceremony. Thank you, she whispered. For this. For understanding that I needed a place to remember him that wasn't just a grave. He deserves to be remembered in joy, not just sorrow. Lucian paused. Will you tell me about him? About who Thomas was before I only knew him as a dying man. And Mira did. She told Lucian about Thomas's terrible jokes, his love of gardening, the way he'd sung off-key while cooking. She told him about their dreams of children, of growing old together. She told him, and Lucian listened. Not with jealousy or resentment, but with genuine interest. With respect for the man whose death had inadvertently brought them together. He sounds like someone I would have liked, Lucian said finally. He would have liked you too. Mira smiled, though tears streamed down her face. He always said the measure of a person wasn't their strength, but their kindness. And you've been nothing but kind to me. They sat together in the restored chapel as afternoon light filtered through new stained glass windows. Mira wore Thomas's ring on a chain around her neck. Not the same as what she'd felt for Thomas. Different. Deeper in some ways, more complicated in others. Love built on understanding rather than innocence. Love forged in darkness and choice. But love nonetheless. I'm ready, she said. Ready for what? To stop living in the space between grief and moving forward. Mira turned to face him. To accept that I can love Thomas's memory and also love you. To stop feeling guilty for being happy. Lucian's expression transformed. I love you, she said. I love you for honoring Thomas's last wish. For protecting me when I couldn't protect myself. For giving me time to heal. For understanding that choosing you didn't mean forgetting him. She paused. I love you for seeing me as something more than a prophecy. For loving me as Mira. Just Mira. Just Mira, Lucian repeated, his voice thick with emotion, is everything I never knew I needed. Everything Eleanor would have wanted me to find. Everything Thomas wanted you to find. He pulled her close. I love you too. For your courage. For your stubborn mercy. For choosing to live despite every reason not to. For being the light in my eternal darkness. They kissed in the chapel where Mira had once promised forever to another man. And somehow it felt right. Felt like honoring the past while embracing the future. Because love doesn't die when people do. It transforms. Grows. Finds new vessels to pour into. And sometimes, in the broken places where grief dwells, love finds a way to bloom again. Later, they walked through Thornhaven together. Villagers still stared. At Mira returned from wherever she'd disappeared to, at the pale stranger beside her. Mrs. Kellen crossed the street again. But this time, Mira didn't flinch. Let them stare, she said. I'm not that frightened widow anymore. I'm not the cursed woman they pretended didn't exist. Who are you then? Lucian asked, smiling. Mira thought about it. About everything she'd survived. Everything she'd lost and found and chosen. I'm Mira Ashford, she said finally. Widow. Survivor. Vampire. And most importantly, I'm someone who learned that the greatest honor you can give to the people you've lost is to keep living. To keep loving. To keep finding reasons to believe the world is worth the pain. They returned to the manor as evening fell. And for the first time since Thomas died, Mira felt something she'd thought lost forever. Not the absence of grief that would never fully leave, but peace with her choices, with her survival, with the knowledge that she'd honored Thomas's last wish in the most profound way possible, by choosing to live, fully, bravely, without apology. And as she fell asleep in Lucien's arms, Thomas's ring warm against her chest, Mira dreamed, not of death or loss, but of Thomas smiling, of him standing in sunlight, whole and healthy, and saying the words that had shaped everything. Tell her to live. And she had. Finally, completely, without reservation. She had chosen to live.